Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is Technique Tuesday. This week, we'll look at options for shaping different types of lace patterns in several shaping scenarios. This video is a continuation of my series on design and modifications, but it applies to any knitter who is simply following a knitting pattern that says to maintain a lace pattern while working the shaping. I've got two swatches here that were worked in lace. This is a lace pattern right here. This is one that's like an all over pattern. You can see the yarn overs moving across the fabric and the decreases moving across the fabric. So from one repeat to the other, they kind of cross over into each other. Where this is a lace panel. So I have three of these very narrow lace panels. Sometimes when you're working with panels, you might alternate one lace panel with a different lace panel, that kind of thing, or you might just repeat the same thing over and over. So I'm going to show you one way of approaching how to decrease or increase when you are working with panels. So what I have here are three copies of the same panel. As soon as I started working the decreases, I shifted all of the stitches in this repeat to being stockinette. They were no longer being worked in lace at all. And then when I got to the point where the next repeat began, I changed back to the established lace pattern. So this is the kind of thing that you could do, that you keep decreasing, and then if you needed to decrease into the next panel, when you got there, you would switch all of those to stockinette. So let me show you in charted form what that would look like. Here's the stitch pattern. It's a multiple of 4 stitches plus 1. So I had 12 stitches plus the 1. So I had 13 stitches that I was working in the lace pattern. But I actually had a couple of more stitches than that. And let me show you how that looked. So here are the 3 panels of the lace pattern that I have laid out in this. And then you'll see I have columns of yellow stitches on either side. These are the selvage stitches. So if I'm knitting flat, I'm going to maintain a column of knit stitches on either side where I can either seam those selvages to another piece of knitting, or I can pick up stitches if I need to do that and then work in the other direction. But the lace pattern itself is contained within those boundaries. Now, if I was working in the round, I'm not going to have selvage stitches, but I might have a marker there. So this yellow column could represent the marker. Or if you're doing something like knitting a sleeve in the round, oftentimes you might have the beginning and end of the round might be worked as columns of stockinette, with the decreases or increases worked on either side of those, so that you have this defined seam line look in your sweater. If we want to decrease, the way that we could do that with a narrow lace pattern, this wouldn't work as well with a really wide pattern that was like 15, 20 stitches wide. This wouldn't work as well because you'd have an enormous amount of stockinette appearing, but it works well for a narrow pattern. And so that is, as you're decreasing, when you start decreasing, you just switch everything to stockinette. So my default is to decrease toward the area that's changing in size, away from the edge. On this edge, that's going to be an SSK. It's a left-leaning decrease. So this stitch remains, but the second stitch is eliminated. So if we did a decrease here, then we'd eliminate this entire column right here. If we have a decrease here, then we start eliminating this column. We have another decrease here. We would eliminate that column. But everything else right here would be switched to stockinette. It would look like this. The gray area is the stitches that have disappeared, but these right here are the stockinette. If you need to increase, you could do something similar, but in reverse. So you have your stitch pattern laid out so that once your increases are done, you know how the stitches are going to be worked. But let's say I wanted to do a make one increase right here. The new stitch would be adjacent to this existing stitch here. I do a make one here, I get a new stitch there. I do a make one here, and I get a new stitch there. So I would keep all of these in stockinette until I had gotten enough stitches that I could work the entire repeat. And so that is one approach, and it works really well with these narrow panels. So something like a sleeve or waist shaping is a perfect place to use that sort of a technique. The next situation is one that you would use in places that are more visible, like not, hidden on a seam line or at the side of the sweater, but visible like around a neckline. And this is a technique that you would need to work with these all over stitch patterns, because these aren't in panels. You can't just eliminate the stitches in a panel and have it be okay. This could also work if the panel was really wide. You could use this same technique as well. So this technique that I'm going to show you this time does work with panels if you want to, but it isn't necessary for panels. But it is more necessary for something like this where you have these all over stitch patterns. So here's an example of a single repeat of this. This is a multiple of 14 stitches plus 2. In row 5, at the beginning of the row, you have a decrease that is outside of the repeat, and afterwards you have a yarn over that's outside of the final repeat. And that's in order to maintain those 4 diagonal yarn overs and decreases that you have working in the pattern. So that's how you maintain the symmetry in this. But you do need to watch out for these situations where you have a decrease at the beginning and a yarn over at the end when you are thinking about your shaping. So here's a chart where I've got 3 repeats of this 14 stitch pattern, and I've got +1 here and +1 at the end. And then I have in yellow, I have my selvage stitches. So this is representing like a crew neck, set-in sleeve, or modified drop shoulder sweater, where you would have different shaping at the neck than you have for the armholes, and you need to maintain the stitch pattern. So laying it out so that you can actually see where the stitch pattern is going is really helpful for that purpose. The yellows are all of the edge stitches. So either selvage stitches if they're vertical, or they're bind off rows if they are horizontal. And so you are not going to be working in pattern when you are working this bind off. You're going to work all of these things in stockinette. So there's not going to be any yarn overs or decreases in those columns of stitches. Now what you have to do is you have to look at whether or not everything that you've decreased is being compensated for. Every time you have a yarn over, there's a compensating decrease, and vice versa. So when we come up here, we can see, well, we've eliminated that yarn over, but the compensating decrease is to the right. It's not even in the fabric. We don't have to worry about it. But right here we do. We can't work this as a yarn over because there isn't a decrease to compensate for it. So we're going to eliminate that there as well. Over here on the left, we have, again, a yarn over and a decrease. This decrease isn't going to be worked, nothing in there. Those are all going to be worked as stockinette. So you need to eliminate that yarn over and just work it as stockinette. And here's a case where you do have a yarn over, but you have a single yarn over and a double decrease. And it's a double decrease that leans in that direction. You can see before we've had single decreases that were all going this way. So this one can just be converted to a left-leaning decrease. Now, the next thing we need to look at is we have bind-offs right here. So, and we've got more bind-off here. This is the selvage stitch right here. But now we're going to start decreasing. And so we want to have our decrease that leans toward the area changing in size. So we're going to add our shaping decrease here. We've got another step in, so we're going to add that one there. Now this time we need a decrease here, but we don't want to compensate that decrease with a yarn over. So we're going to eliminate that yarn over, and we're going to change this decrease to one that leans to the left instead. So here's what our chart looks like after we have done all of that cleaning up. I use charting software. This really helps me to lay everything out. I use a program called Stitch Mastery. They have it for PCs and Macs. There is a free demo version where you can create a lace chart. You wouldn't be able to save it, but you'd be able to create it. There are also There's a program called Stitch Fiddle that's a website, and there's a free version. There's also an upgraded paid version, but you can use graph paper for something like this. You can use an Excel spreadsheet to do your yarn overs and decreases. That's how I did lace patterns for years, is in Excel spreadsheets or on graph paper. So all of those are possible, but it really is helpful to be able to lay this out so that you know that you're keeping your stitch count correct and that you have a compensating decrease for every yarn over and vice versa, and that you eliminate any that aren't going to have something to compensate for it later. This last example is one in which you don't have to worry about maintaining the stitch pattern for a lace panel at all. And that's a situation where, like I have here, this is cables, but it would apply to lace panels as well, where you might have it going, say, up the sides of a cardigan, and then you want to split for neckline shaping. In this case, I've got a V-neck. And I don't have to decrease into the stitch pattern panel in order to get that shaping. And the way that I did that was to move the shaping to the far side of the panel. In this case, what I did was decreases that were leaning toward the edge. This panel actually serves as the edge or the selvage rather than leaning it away. That is just a personal preference. My default is typically to aim or lean the decreases toward the area changing in size right here. But in this case, I didn't want that defined stockinette line along the edge of the purl stitches, so I leaned the decreases toward the panel. So let me show you what that would look like if it was charted out. This is a chart of a lace panel that is bordered with purl stitches like my cable panel was. And in this case, I have the decreases leaning toward the panel, so toward the edge. And in this case, I'm showing how it's the edge stitch that is getting eliminated, because when you have a decrease that leans to the right, the stitch on the left ends up on top, and it's this stitch that is going away. So that's why I have the no stitch boxes appearing to the right of the decrease. But if you wanted them to lean away from the panel toward the area changing in size, you might chart it out something like this. So this is showing that defined line of stitches is being maintained, and the decrease is always being worked in that stitch that's right adjacent to the purl stitches. And then the ones that get eliminated are to the left of the decrease, because in this case we've got a decrease that's leaning left, so the stitch on the right ends up on top, and the one on the left is underneath, and it's the one that disappears. So this is an option if you're working with panels in a situation with something like V-neck shaping. I will include a link to a PDF down in the video description, which will include the various charts shown in this video, if that's of any interest to you. I'll also leave links to the charting programs I mentioned down in the description as well. In the next video, I'll cover shaping while maintaining different types of cable patterns. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below, or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rox Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.